First name's Donnie, last name's Glover. In it to win it for the long haul, baby. Top of the day to you, Hannibal Johnson. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. There's so much I want to talk to you about. Today is Indigenous Peoples Day, and I'm glad you were able to take a moment. First of all, attorney, tell us about your books.
So my latest book is actually kind of a departure. It's called 10 Ways We Can Advance Social Justice Without Destroying Each Other. And it really is appropriate, particularly given the pending election that is, as you know, incredibly divisive. And so it gives some tips on how to engage around social justice issues. We all have social justice issues that are important to us. And the book is written in a way that is accessible and nonpartisan so that it gives you ideas as to how to get in where you fit in, as I say.
Would you say, now this is your first time on this particular show. This is brought to us by New Life Recovery Center, and New Life deals with substance abuse, gambling abuse, but that's not the core focus of the show. The core focus is mental health. So as you mention these social justice issues, a question that comes to mind is your perspective on how this has disaffected not just our mental health as a people of color, but non-Black peoples in America as well.
Well, I've written a lot about the history here in Tulsa, where I am, which is a great example of something that all Americans suffer with and through, and that's what I call historical racial trauma. And it's not just the victims; it's both the victims and the perpetrators or oppressors. Historically, all of us suffer when others of us are marginalized in any way. So, because what is fundamentally important in terms of social justice is for us to be aware of and embracing of this notion of shared humanity, that we're all in this together and that we are only as good as the least among us. And if we share that sentiment around humanity, the humanity of all of us, then we don't have these gaps and these disparities and this differential treatment and this duality between the oppressed and the oppressors, right? Because we're all on a level plane. That's the goal. And I realize that's aspirational, but there's some concrete things that we can do to move us closer to that point.
Such as fundamentally learning about and from one another, understanding what our history has been, leveraging the positive aspects of that history. It's called appreciative inquiry, and figuring out where we can go together, atoning for the missteps of the past. Those are all simple things that we can do to move us closer toward our shared humanity. When you say appreciative inquiry, how does that relate to the governor of Florida and other politicians who want to ban the book? They want to ban books that talk about this history in which you're suggesting we read or inferring that we read so that we can gain an appreciative inquiry.
Yeah, I mean, so
Do you think they should be banning books?
Absolutely not. So part of what happens in any forward movement towards social justice is some level of backlash, some level of reaction, because somebody is going to have a sense of fear and loss around what we see as advancement. So right now, I would argue that we're in a place where because of demographic change in the United States, because America is browning, there is a certain level of fear and sense of loss in the traditional dominant white culture. And that fear and sense of loss is actually being stoked and fanned by people I consider to be demagogues. They're using that psychological vulnerability for their own political ends.
Like Donald Trump?
That would be
Okay,
one
okay.
example, for sure.
So
He would
this
be one
sense,
example.
so this sense of fear, this sense of loss, fear of what?
Fear of retribution, for example. Let me give you a quick little story from a while back, 1988. Remember when Jesse Jackson ran for president? I was working at a white law firm, and one of the legal secretaries, who was an older woman, very very kind to me, did whatever she was asked. A typical older white lady, I would say. She said to me, "You know, I really like that Jesse Jackson. I like a lot of the things he's saying, but I just don't think I could vote for him because I think he'd want to get back at us for all the things that we've done over the years." She said that to me. And she was
Stop
being
doing it.
very, very genuine and sincere about it.
Stop doing it then. If this is Domestic Violence Month, don't put your hands on her no more. Don't call her out her name anymore. Don't take her money anymore. Don't oppress her anymore. Stop. Stop doing the things that you wouldn't want somebody to do to you or yours.
I think that what she would say to that is what I hear often in terms of historical racial trauma. She would say, "Well, you know, I'm a good person. I've never really treated anybody badly." But the point she misses is that this is a societal ill, and that she is, as a white woman, is the beneficiary of a lot of white privileges that she doesn't even understand or acknowledge.
My brain is just processing this. Because I want to say something intelligent, but I'm just stop doing the things that you know are wrong. Just stop. And you might want to make some amends. If growing up, as we looked at younger kids, we had a choice. We could bully them, or we could treat them like people. Because one day, that kid who is 15 years younger than us, 10 years younger than us, he might grow up to be bigger than us. And remember the day when we punched him in the face or took his lunch money. And he said, "You know what? I'm bigger than you now. And remember what you did to me back in 1988? Here's your turn."
But I would argue that the bigger danger involves people who are non-parties to that situation but are aware of it. Silence is complicity. And what that secretary would be thinking is, you know, I never directly participated in anything. I was never hateful to anybody personally. And so I'm just kind of on the sidelines here. But again, silence is complicity. You're helping the system, and you're preserving the status quo if you sit idly on the sidelines.
The thought has come to me. Edmund Burke said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing."
Absolutely. I agree. And that's kind of where we are as a nation politically. And that is why Liz Cheney has become kind of a hero because she's doing what a lot of, I'll call out male people on her side of the aisle are too cowardly to do, which is essentially call a spade a spade.
I mean, you have, how many books do you have now?
11.
Considering the books that you've read, are any of them on a block list or do not read or ban list?
Not to my knowledge.
Well, how do you feel about books being banned?
I buy into the cliched marketplace of ideas concept, and that is, no matter how odious your ideas, you can put them out there, and in the end, if we're all given the ability to evaluate, analyze, process, the better ideas will surface to the top. So I'm definitely not for banning books, even the books that I wouldn't urge people to expose themselves to.
I'm just going to be forthright. As a news publisher, it is so challenging to find writers to write articles, op-eds, news stories. I would probably publish a Klansman's writings just because I love writers that much.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We need to know what the Klan is thinking, or whoever the hate group is. I want to know what they're thinking. And I'd rather know than not know. And if they're, and particularly if they're willing to put their name on it and put it out there.
You said cowardly earlier. I couldn't agree more. When I think back to the lynchings that Ida B. Wells wrote about, I remember researching a picture of a mother and a son. Her name was Clara or Laura Nelson. She and her son were hung. You know that story?
That's in Okemah, Oklahoma in 1911.
It was off of a bridge.
Yep, that's it. It's a famous photograph. This fellow named James Allen wrote a book called Lynching Photography in America. And that photograph is one of the many photographs in that book.
Are we as a people too far removed for that to impact us today? Have we healed from that? Have we forgotten that? Does it even matter?
My guess is that many people are totally unaware of that aspect of our history, from the period that historians and sociologists often call the nadir of race relations in America, the low point of race relations, because of the lynchings and because of the so-called race riots that were going on throughout the nation. So a lot of people are unaware of that history, and they're unaware of it largely because it's not included in the formal curriculum that's offered in the public schools, and most people go through a public school system. And it's not included in the curriculum because there are many people who have power who want to sanitize our history and want to have this kind of pablum notion of patriotism that involves singing the national anthem and waving the flag and never saying anything bad about the country. The country doesn't get better if we don't acknowledge that the country has capacity to improve, and we don't acknowledge the accurate history of our past. So, I think that I would hope that people would be affected were they to, for example, view the photographs that are in that book, Lynching Photography of America. It's deeply moving, I think, to a person who has a scintilla of compassion and empathy.
In my research, I came across the Devil's Punch Bowl. It's a small grove of peach trees near Natchez, 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 Mississippi, where some say the fruit is unpalatable due to the history of the area. During the American Civil War, the Devil's Punch Bowl was a refugee camp for freed slaves. The camp was located in a hollow pit in the under the hill area of Natchez, with trees on the bluffs above. According to local lore, formerly enslaved people were forcibly kept in the grove until they died from starvation and malnourishment. They were buried where they fell, and their bodies fertilized the ground for the peach trees that now grow there. And people are cautioned not to eat the peaches. Natchez is called the Devil's Punch Bowl. Another piece of history that I've come across is Black children as alligator bait in Florida. If you Google alligator bait, you'll see these images. And they even went so far as to have pictures, cartoons, cups,
I've
all
seen
kinds.
Yeah, I've seen something about that. I don't remember specifically, but that sounds familiar. The first piece that you shared with the fruit trees did not sound familiar, but it brought to mind, obviously, strange fruit.
Billie Holiday.
Billie Holiday song, "Strange Fruit."
So again, you know, we're moving up there in age. Their children, 10 years old, 15 years old. I got to tell you, when I first started corresponding with you about Black Wall Street, I remember since then I've talked to my elementary school teacher, and he was big on Black history. I mean, he really gave me my start, and he knew nothing about Black Wall Street. What happens if people like you and I don't write about Black Wall Street and all of the other things, or many of the other things that are a part of our history? What happens? I mean, will the 10-year-old of today care? Will they know anything? I remember a young man asking me a good 10 years ago, "Donnie, why do you care so much about Black history?" What do I say to him?
Because Black history is American history. And if you care about the country and the people in it, including yourself, you have to know something of the past. You have to be able to interpret the past in a way that you glean lessons that are important for the present and essential for our shared successful future.
What are your thoughts on this so-called Indigenous Peoples Day, formerly known as Columbus Day?
We certainly need to do a better job generally celebrating the histories that are intertwined, the histories of our long marginalized people, Black folks, Native folks, other folks in this country have contributed mightily to its success. So taking a moment to elevate the Indigenous community on whose land we rest today is really important. And understanding that the Indigenous people didn't exist in a vacuum in terms of American history. Their history, of course, is intertwined with all our histories. But there's a particular relationship between Native people and Black people that we don't regularly cover in the curriculum. We don't regularly explore.
So, you know, I know, ooh. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
I was trying to put in here a picture that I came across of Luzia. And Luzia is her bones were found in a cave in Brazil. And they date back 12 to 14,000 years. She's a full forehead, big-headed Black woman. And certainly brown skin. That's what her DNA, that's what the scientists reconcocted. Interestingly, this year, they have gone back to that image and narrowed her nose. Do you find that scientists, mainstream scientists from these famous universities across the world, struggle with African, knowing that we all trace our roots back to Africa, if you subscribe to that?
So I don't know that I could offer a considered or thoughtful opinion on that question. All I know is that I see more and more prominent folks acknowledging without fanfare the roots of humankind being in the motherland in Africa.
I've done some research and I got to share it with you because you've always, imparted upon me information that I've needed to know about the San Bushmen, S-A-N Bushmen. And according to my research, they have the oldest DNA on the planet. And then I've done some research on Asia. It's my understanding that man left Africa, and the first place he went was to Asia. Then there was this migration to Europe. And each time we moved, our physical features adapted to that region. So when you look at the San Bushmen, and I give you a prototype of the San Bushmen, it would be Nelson Mandela. Now I'm going to say something and some people are not going to like it, but it's okay. When you look at Nelson Mandela, his eyes are kind of wide. Would you agree?
I have to create an image in my head of him, but yes, okay.
So if we see a black person today who have wide eyes like that, we'll say he's got Chinese eyes. But I'm here to tell you that no, Chinese have San Bushman eyes. That those eyes come out of Africa.
Yeah, and I think we get too caught up in this physiognomy and physical and appearance. There are dark-skinned black people in Africa who have straight hair and blue eyes. I mean, there are all sorts of mixes of people all over the place. And so we get into this sort of stereotypical view of this person, that person, and this person based on what is I think most people will acknowledge what is essentially just a social construct. Race is not real; it's socially created. It's man-made. So we created this system that is fundamentally flawed and not borne out by nature and biology. So it should not surprise us that there are exceptions to the exception to the exception to the exception.
Do you think we as Americans, I mean, obviously America is browning. They say by 2045, there'll be, and I see more Latinos than anything, especially as they're coming across the borders. And another thing I try to explain to my fellow African Americans is we don't have reinforcements. That's why their numbers, that's why Latinos have surpassed us numerically and, a pretty healthy reproductive rate. But in contrast, non-Black Americans, non-brown Americans are not reproducing at even a similar rate. And so some of the things we see politically, I just got to put it out there, like this ban on abortion is part of that, the hope that non-Black and brown Americans can catch up.
I certainly hope that's not the case, because I see the whole question of abortion as fundamentally about healthcare and about self-determination for a female who is experiencing pregnancy, and that's, for me, it's fairly straightforward. I don't want to be making that decision. I want the person who is potentially going to bear a child to make that decision for herself with the advice, ideally, of a medical professional. And that's the end of the story for me.
What do you think is behind it? I mean, to make it illegal?
So power and control and dominance and misogyny are all things that come immediately to mind. Patriarchy. These are mostly men wanting to make these decisions as a way, arguably, of controlling this population of females. And I think we have to call it what it is. Now, that's
So
part of it.
if you and I, who share that sentiment, don't vote against something like that, do we become like the white lady you described earlier on the sideline? Like, I have no nickel in that dime. I'm going to stay out of it. Do we become that very same person?
Absolutely. And I would say, to make your point even more clear, that what we call the abortion issue is not a female issue. It's a human issue. And so people who are not female are invested in this decision as well. If we want to have a just, equitable society where we have civil and human rights, then we need to support women's right to control their own bodies. And that, for me, again, is pretty simple.
So I'm getting ready to pose a question to you that you, as in addition to your 11 books, you're also an attorney. Do we live in a democracy? Or is it just a republic? Because in a democracy, the majority rules.
Yeah.
And it's my understanding that if all of Oklahoma voted for one candidate, but those people representing Oklahoma in the Electoral College felt a different way, as was the case, and not so much with Oklahoma, but with the presidential election of George Bush, with the election of Donald Trump, if they feel a different way, they don't have to go the way of the majority.
So as I recall, those are rules set at the state level, and most electors in the Electoral College are bound to follow the will of the people, the majority vote of their state. I think there are a couple of exceptions with some quirky rules in terms of what the electors can and can't do, but by and large, it mirrors this sort of representative democracy approach, which is that we don't have a direct democracy because we don't directly vote on everything. We vote on people who represent us at various levels, who are then charged with carrying out the will of the people. They don't always do that. And there are some other things at play, like a Supreme Court that historically has been charged with enforcing the Constitution, which protects, at least in theory, protects the rights of the minority. So everything is not majority rule. That there are certain things that are civil and human rights that are protected irrespective of the will of the majority, which is important, right? But it gets complicated. So we definitely don't live in a pure direct democracy. We live in a representative democracy in a constitutional form of government where, at least theoretically, people who are in the minority and have historically been oppressed have some rights that are not subjected to the will of the majority.
And as noted earlier, the majority finds itself numerically soon becoming the minority. And you noted the sense of fear and loss.
Well, let me just say that even though the demographic reality is that America is browning, and by I think the projection now is 2050 we will be majority minority. That's only numerically. In terms of the levers of power, we're still going to be a white dominated country for a very long time. Look at the corporate suites. Look at who the CEOs are. Look at who has the money. Look at who the billionaires are. Those numbers proportionally are going to be skewing white for a very long time.
So, do you have any indigenous blood in your ancestry?
I have not confirmed it, although my father, who's deceased, says that we have Muskogee Creek ancestry. So I don't know for sure. And I used to tease and tell people when they ask me that, it's all I can do handling being black, let alone, adding something else to the mix.
Muskogee Creek, that's Oklahoma.
Right. Well, it's one of the 5 tribes: Muskogee Creek, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Seminole. They're all sort of Oklahoma-based as a result of the forced migration of the 5 tribes out of the Southeast in the 1830s and 1840s.
How many people know that, where the original Oklahomans came from? Because it was formerly called Indian Territory.
Yeah, I think most people probably don't know that. Most people probably don't know that the so-called 5 civilized tribes that I just named, they were called the 5 civilized tribes because they were tribes that readily acculturated to the white way. And they were tribes that all engaged in the practice of chattel slavery, enslaving black folks. So all 5 of the tribes had within them black folks who were enslaved and free black people as well when they migrated to Oklahoma in the 1830s and 1840s.
So I can infer that not all blacks on the Trail of Tears were enslaved.
Right.
That some of them were actually free. And I actually write about it in my book, I Am Black Wall Street. This guy, Chief John Horse, and he fought side by side with the Seminoles in the Second Seminole War. And Seminole, let me just say, is not a tribe. It comes from the word Cimarrones, which is wild ones. And those were essentially the indigenous peoples who fled as far south as the Everglades. And the ones who never left are called the unconquered.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Seminoles are interesting because they were, somewhat like renegades, but they incorporated in their mix runaway slaves who fled to the Everglades in Florida. They end up mixing with the Seminoles, not surprisingly, and these people were called Maroons. And so they were very hostile to the United States efforts to sort of force them away and take their land. And so there were a couple of Seminole wars, and John Horse was involved in that at least the second of the 2 Seminole wars.
I've always been fascinated, Hannibal, at the Black Indian representation during Mardi Gras. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but they have these dances and they dress up in these very elaborate costumes that it takes all year to make. In my family, my dad told me, and God rest his soul, that my grandma, my great grandmother, his grandma was Blackfoot Indian, and so as a child, I've always been fascinated with the Indians, and as an adult, I can only presume that deep in my spirit, I knew as a child that there was something more about the Indians than what was presented to us on television. I know this. I always like to see the Indians beat up the cowboys.
Yeah, the images that we have, unfortunately, shape our thinking about our history, because the images I have from childhood of Indians are few, but they are Tonto in the Lone Ranger. They are the anti-pollution commercial with the crying Indian. They're very narrow images of people.
Have you since seen images of Black Indians? I mean, I've seen one very melanated kid, and he's got the longest, I guess you call them ponytails. And but here's the thing, and this is somewhat related, I guess, very much related to mental health. as a Black person, how is it received if we share with another Black person, hey, my great grandmother was Blackfoot. Hey, my grandfather was Creek or Muskogee. I've had some Blacks say to me, Donnie, why do you want to associate with the Indians when they enslaved us? Why not just be connected to Africa? Why not just celebrate the Africa? My mother's father was from Puerto Rico, which could imply some Taino Indian. And I guess what I'm saying is, why do Blacks shame other Blacks based on non-Black history that we
so that might that's partially depending, I think, on geography, because I'm in Oklahoma, which is the former Indian Territory. So it's not uncommon for Black folks to have to be part of the Cherokee Nation or the Creek Nation or whatever, or the Choctaw Nation. I was in a board meeting last week with a friend of mine who's Black. I mean, but he's also Choctaw. If you saw him on the street, you'd say he's Black. You wouldn't see the Choctaw, but he's a card-carrying member of the Choctaw Nation. So it's not uncommon here for there to be that mixture. And for people who talk about the past of the 5 civilized tribes enslaving folks, well, there were only a few, but there were Black folks who enslaved Black folks, yes, as well.
Yes. I've recently, an elder told me just last week, I don't know how true it is, but this elder, I mean, he has no reason to lie. He said that some of the Americans, some of the Blacks from America who went back to Liberia, enslaved Liberians, indigenous Liberians.
Wow.
Now I have to look that up, but it brings to mind a book by Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where formerly victimized peoples then take on the characteristics, like the Patty Hearst syndrome, take on the characteristics of the oppressor.
Well, I mean, there's a cliche, and it has a fair amount of truth to it. The cliche is very simple and memorable. Hurt people hurt people.
It also brings to mind a guy who I know who used to be addicted to crack cocaine, who cleaned up for 15 years and now sells cocaine.
Yeah.
I'm like, God then freed you from the plantation of slavery, and now you're going to sell it. And his excuse is they're going to get it from somewhere. And it's like, damn, you didn't learn anything.
Right. So we could have a psychoanalyst evaluate that guy and give us a report, because there's a lot of psychology and psychiatry in all that. One of the things that occurs to me that's really important for everybody to think about is that racism as a dynamic affects all of us. What I mean by that is there's this concept of internalized oppression. So if we live in this system long enough, even though we probably won't articulate it, we look at ourselves in ways that diminish our capacity and place us in an inferior position vis-a-vis the dominant culture. So it's internalized oppression. Like a simple example I could give you some people in the modern world, but I'm not going to. Let's talk about the house Negro, who was given special privileges. In part, that person's role was to look down on people like him and to protect the interests of the dominant person for whom he worked.
Massa, is we sick today?
Exactly. Sam Jackson was so good in Django. I mean, perfect.
I couldn't watch that film, Hannibal.
It's tough. I think I've only watched it once, but I'm glad I watched it. I couldn't do it on repeat cycle though.
When I heard Quentin Tarantino said that this is the best slavery movie ever, it just turned my stomach. I couldn't watch it. I refused to watch it. I've heard so many things about it. I want to hear the stories about Haiti. I want to hear the stories. I could watch Amistad. That was somewhat hopeful. Maybe I'm slave movied out after Roots.
Yeah, it's tough to confront that, certainly in a visual medium, because of the brutality and the total refusal to acknowledge the humanity of people who were enslaved.
And then I think of this guy, Chief John Horse, and this is something, and you're an expert on this, at least more than most Americans. As we talk about Black Wall Street, Tulsa, and thank you for your work. I mean, I couldn't imagine not knowing you at this juncture. But considering what you have done to help your state, your city, and Black people across America and beyond, to know the history of Tulsa. A core concept, as you alluded earlier, the Maroons, where we broke off and formed our own. In a country where today the stigma is, oh, Black people are lazy. Some of the stigma. Black people don't want to work. Black people can't this. Black people can't that. And that's nothing that you have ever bought into in all of our conversations. Something I've never bought into. My parents, like yours, pushed education, pushed excellence.
Yes, and I've always thought it important to really excel in all my Black jobs.
But we built towns.
Right.
Did we not build? I mean, there's more than just, and that's the beauty of Tulsa. And big ups to Charlie Wilson. I imagine you probably know him.
I know people who know. I don't know him personally. I know people who do know him, who grew up with him.
But that song, I mean, when I do these Black Wall Street Awards up and down the East Coast, I mention that song, You Dropped the Bomb on Me. And so many people like me didn't know the connection. What's the connection?
So no, he says it's not about the massacre. He says it's not about that.
But it was the first time that a bomb was dropped on American people, right?
Yeah, but he says that the song is not connected to that.
But GAP stands for Greenwood, Archer, and Pine, right. A major intersection in Black Wall Street, Tulsa.
Right. Greenwood. There's no question that they are a Tulsa group, and he's familiar with the history. But people have said that for a long time. So I had to verify that that was the case. And I found several interviews where he was asked specifically that question. He said, no, that's not what it was about.
But clearly,
and maybe at the subconscious level, okay, it bled into his work, but he wasn't consciously thinking about it. According to him,
I have to change my story.
Yeah.
But it was the first time a bomb was dropped on an American people. 36 square blocks of self-empowerment, self-sufficiency, Black empowerment destroyed in less than 24 hours. I understand it was 14 hours.
Yeah, and the community was destroyed not by, I'll say, incendiary devices, because we don't know what actually was dropped on the community. But the community was destroyed by a mob of thousands of white men who invaded the community and destroyed everything and set fires all throughout the community. Whatever was dropped on the community, according to eyewitnesses, it did cause the flames to spread more rapidly and burn more brilliantly. So it wasn't helpful in any way. And there was some strafing from the air using guns, strafing the crowd below, according to eyewitnesses. And it is important because the only other example like that where there was essentially some sort of bomb or incendiary device dropped on an American community by other Americans was Move in Philadelphia, right? When was that? 90s maybe?
I'll find out.
Yeah, but that was really remarkable back then. It was either late 80s or early 90s, I believe.
Both Black communities.
Right.
85.
Yep.
Has Tulsa healed?
Well, healing is a process. So Tulsa is healing. And the first, I argue in my books that there are 3 stages in the process: acknowledgement, apology, and atonement. And so we've done a much better job the last 20 years or so acknowledging this history. Incorporated into the public school curriculum, building things like Greenwood Rising, the museum, the Black Wall Street History Museum, doing programs and projects that highlight the awareness. The history became interesting to some people through watching the HBO series Watchmen, which featured a scene set in Black Wall Street. So we've done a lot of things really to change the awareness. We get visitors from all over the world now for Greenwood Rising, the History Center. And I served as local curator for the History Center, which was built with guidance from the exhibition specialist in New York City called Local Projects. So it's been open about 2 years. And again, we get people from all over the world. All the 8th graders in Tulsa Public Schools have a field trip to Greenwood Rising, the History Center. So all that acknowledgement piece is good. We've had apologies from many of the past mayors, the police chief, and all that sort of stuff, city council. The hard part is the atonement part. So what is it that we need to do to make amends? So we can never make up for the atrocity that happened in 1921. So how can we, though, get as close as possible? We can do that by, building things like Greenwood Rising, infusing funds into the Black community, making sure that opportunity is rife in the devastated community. All these sorts of things are part of the atonement process. And so a lot of those things are in process now. One of the more interesting things that's in process now is we got a grant from the federal government, from the Department of Transportation, a little over $1 million to study the possible removal of a leg of Interstate 244 that was built
through the Black community
during urban renewal, built right through the Black community. So the federal government is now looking at the possibility of actually moving that leg outside the community and opening up that land that's freed up for development.
The $1 billion question: will there be another Tulsa's Black Wall Street?
I think the answer is a fairly solid no, because
things have changed.
Dynamics have changed. I mean, things were not stagnant. We didn't freeze in 1942, kind of the height of Black Wall Street. So the community is not segregated anymore. The land ownership has changed. The economy has changed. So brick and mortar is only part of the thing. It's not the thing anymore. That's why I talk about, rather than talking about a physical community, I talk about the Black Wall Street mindset.
Yes, sir.
Which is leveraging the past, projecting it into our present, understanding that we don't have the level of barriers that those people faced, understanding that we now have technology that allows us to have the globe as our potential market, and then going from there.
I agree. As time is winding down, I have to acknowledge the other 2 official Black Wall Streets. Richmond, made famous by Maggie Walker. They have erected a statue in honor of the matriarch of Richmond's Black Wall Street. And then Durham, where the Anchor Institution was one of the oldest Black life insurance companies, North Carolina Mutual. But from Tulsa to Richmond to Durham, and then we've mentioned Florida, Black Wall Street is a national story that transcends borders, state borders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Black Wall Street has become kind of a moniker for the message that Black capitalism, Black entrepreneurship, Black commerce is a thing, and it's not a new thing. It's a thing that we may have forgotten or lost track of, but it really is a thing still.
One of the things I've also learned in researching my book on Black Wall Street was that Spain owned Florida, because I started asking myself, what was going on in Florida? What made it so popular? Why did Andrew Jackson make it his business to go down there and wage war on the Blacks and the Seminoles? Spain owned Florida up until 1831. So if you were enslaved and you could escape from Georgia, South Carolina, Louisiana, and make it to Florida, and you were willing to convert to Catholicism and willing to fight for the Spanish crown, you could get your freedom. So down in Florida, there were armed blacks. Blacks were armed. Chief John Horse, he became pretty much a general who went all the way through Oklahoma down to Mexico. But the real question I have for you, and you don't know this is coming. So this is baseball season. We're down to, getting into the championship, the pennants and all of that. Go Yankees. Tell me about the Dawes Commission and the audacity of these white males to determine someone's DNA, something today that you go through a DNA company or Ancestry.com. I'm just baffled. I'm perplexed. I'm flabbergasted in what I've learned about the Dawes Commission. And that was there in Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so the Dawes Commission was a body that was created to break up the Indian land masses. So one of the things that the Dawes Commission did was to create these censuses of the tribes. And these were white men. And this was the late 1800s and early 1900s. And, race, white supremacy was the order of the day in terms of ideology. So when they registered the members of the tribes, the people that they encountered whom they deemed to be Black were put on a separate roll called the Freedman roll. And the other Indians were put on what's called the blood rolls, which came back to haunt folk in terms of their membership in the tribes, because it's a really complex story. But all 5 of the 5 civilized tribes officially aligned themselves with the Confederacy during the Civil War. The Confederacy lost the war, so the tribes executed treaties with the federal government. And with one exception, the tribes in those treaties agreed to give citizenship status to their formerly enslaved people. Later on, even now, some of the tribes, most notably right now, the Muskogee Creek tribe, are contesting that promise they made to give citizenship to the freedmen. So the descendants of those Black people who had been in those tribes are now fighting for citizenship rights within the context of the tribes. And all that traces back to the way that the Dawes Commission did the censuses for the various tribes.
Does that mean they're owed money and or land?
The freedmen got land as well. It was access to wealth at the time, which would have been the late 1800s, early 1900s. What it means is, if you don't have citizenship in the Muskogee Creek Nation today, then you don't have any rights in terms of determining who the leadership of that tribe is, and you may not have access to healthcare benefits and other perks that come with being a tribal member, perks from the federal government. So it's really convoluted. The Cherokee Nation has already been through this, and they agreed to grant citizenship to the people who are descendants of the so-called freedmen. They resolved it amicably after several years in federal court. They didn't appeal the decision that came out in favor of the freedmen. So the Cherokee Nation really is a model of how this situation with the freedmen can be handled in a way that respects the rights of the freedmen.
Hannibal, what's a $5 Indian?
I don't know that I know that. I don't know if I've heard that term. What is that?
$5 Indian.
$5 Indian.
My understanding is that it's non-black and brown peoples who paid $5 to get on that roll.
Oh, well, there is some truth to that, in that people who are mixed, Native and European, are not going through these struggles that people who are mixed, Native and Black, or people who are descendants of former enslaved people are going through. That is to say that Native people, like any other people in this country, incorporated all the things that are involved in a racist culture. So the primacy, the elevation of whiteness is a thing that was incorporated within the context of those tribes as well.
And we'll put a plug in for your books, how people can follow you, and some of anything else biographical that you'd like to share. I'll give you the full screen. Tell them who you are.
So my Hannibal Johnson, I'm an attorney, author, consultant. I do a lot of work in the diversity, equity, inclusion space. I do a lot of speaking, but primarily known for my work around Black Wall Street, which is the history of Tulsa's historic Greenwood district. The most recent book on that topic is called Black Wall Street 100, An American City Grapples with Its Historical Racial Trauma. But my most recent book generally is a book called 10 Ways We Can Advance Social Justice Without Destroying Each Other. And it is really a primer on how to get involved in the social justice issue of your choice. It's nonpartisan, but it gives you just some entry points for getting involved with and being a meaningful change agent within the context of whatever social justice issue you're concerned with. I do speaking engagements across the country. I'm speaking soon in later this month, I believe it is, in Virginia. But I'm open to whatever opportunities there are. If you're interested in learning more about Black Wall Street or the all Black towns in Oklahoma, or exploring social justice opportunities, I'm available and at your disposal. I am originally from Arkansas, attended the University of Arkansas, have an undergraduate degree with a double major in economics and sociology, and a law degree from Harvard. Have been in Tulsa for my entire adult professional career, beginning in the mid-1980s. So that's a little bit about me.
How did you move to Oklahoma?
So my hometown is Fort Smith, Arkansas, which is only 100 miles from here.
Okay.
I came back to my home region, essentially.
Okay. All right. Well, you have really added some enlightenment for me and hopefully for others who have watched. And I just want to thank you publicly for always granting me access to the great brain of Hannibal. The only.
I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. If I think better, I do better. Thank you for tuning in. Good afternoon, world.
All right.